Assalamu alaikum and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I got hijacked this morning through cyber security and cyber crime. The presentation I was going to give was given in the 2-minute film from KPMG. You'll see a lot of similarities in the slides of what I have to say and what they said in 2 minutes, except I have 20 minutes to entertain you. So I have to start telling you by some stories. We are here to talk about compliance, and compliance basically is about adherence to rules, guidelines, many of them coming from regulations. Many of us in the banking industry feel constrained and feel we are victims of regulations. I think partly it's true, but the fact is regulation exists in many industries. I'm a lazy person, even though I've been working for about 40 years in financial services. I've always aspired to go fishing when I retired. And I learned the hard way that even fishing is regulated. What do I mean by that? I was doing financing for a plant to process tuna. And for the first time I learned there's something about how you catch fish in a more friendly way, in a less painful way. I did not know that. I had given $100 million to a company, and suddenly someone told me that the product cannot be bought and sold by the key companies like Lever Brothers, who have standards about how the fish net is made. And I learned the hard way that my dream of going fishing is also going to be regulated. So regulations are important, and they exist in many, many industries, including financial services. In financial services, in the last 15 years or so, I think we have learned the hard way more about regulations. How did that happen? The regulators kept trying to tell us about adherence to regulations, and globally, I think financial services paid some attention to it, but not necessarily as much as they should have. So they did what any sensible person would do: hit you where it hurts. So where is that? Can you put up my slides? The first thing was about numbers, and you saw some of them. It's real. Whether it's in dollars, rupees, these numbers are getting bigger. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Thank you. Second thing, to my mind, if we are serious about compliance and regulations, we have to talk about the ecosystem, not any one player in the ecosystem. And I'll explain what I mean by that. Third, if I don't leave any other thought with you today, keep one thing in mind. Yes, Mahmood, technology is coming, and we will buy you some more technology toys in law. But at the end of the day, in compliance, it's about culture, not policies, procedures. Got to get the culture right, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. Everybody's talking about FATF, so I was told I have to say something about it also. So I'll share my personal views on it and leave you with some thoughts on what it means to get FATF right for any country, including Pakistan. And then, since I do work for a bank, I couldn't help but talk a little bit about financial services and what role financial services can play in all this. So the first thing is, you have been bombarded with numbers, and the numbers are big. But to me, these numbers, believe it or not, are not as big as a number which is not on the screen. And you can say these bankers are used to dollars and cents and rupees, so for them money means nothing. No, money means something to us. When our profits get halved, it means a lot. Our stock price gets halved. But the number which is not thought about is brand value. Any company which builds a brand spends billions on it. I work for Habib Bank. HBL is one of the most recognized brands. After Coke, we are the most recognized brand in this country. Our brand is 75 years plus old. There's 75 years of investment and billions of rupees behind that. And when an event happens, it's the brand value which gets affected. Your brand value is really goodwill. Your brand value is what you can be sold at. So the numbers for any financial institution to keep in mind are not the penalty you pay, not the cost of what it takes to fix it, but the loss of brand and trust. Trust of the customer, trust of the owners, trust of the regulators. Many stakeholders do not wish to give you the support they were prepared to give you before, and it takes a lot of time and effort to build that trust back. And those are the real numbers we need to worry about when an event like this happens. Ecosystem. Who is us? There are many players in this, and each player has a role to play. For any country, industry, to get this right, the whole ecosystem has to come together. It's a little bit like a cold, a virus. We all hear about dengue fever. How does the dengue fever spread? How does it go from one cell to the other cell, from one human being to another human being? When it comes in, it affects everybody. Ecosystems have key players in them. If you aspire to operate just locally, then it's your local regulator. However, if you aspire to operate internationally, it's your home country regulator and your international regulators. In that, for US dollars, it's been made very clear, if you use the currency, they have jurisdiction over you. You can have all the lawyers in the world debate it. At the moment, that's the position the US law has taken. We may like it, we may not like it. Their answer is very simple. Don't use the US dollar. And that's a choice. You want to trade in wheat? Fine. What are the implications of that? The implications of that are very simple. If you want to be part of the international community of nations, if you want to trade with the rest of the world, you have to give respect to your own laws and the laws of other countries. If you don't, you will not be able to deal with them. And there are enough studies to show the positive impact of trading with other nations on your GDP. There's enough data to show the positive impact of financial flows going across to different countries through direct investment. That improves the speed of growth of an economy or deteriorates it. So these are choices countries and companies have to make if they wish to participate locally and internationally. Financial industry players. Very important to understand, it's not banks. It's all players in the financial industry. Banks, stock exchanges, security firms, money exchange houses. All of these who have any way of exchanging value are covered by these regulations, not just banks. We tend to focus on banks more because they're a bigger part of the economy and they perhaps have a bigger brand. But a small security house or a trade bank is as much part of it. Today, one of the key areas of regulation and money laundering is trade. Is securities trading, not just payment systems. So we have to start understanding is the financial industry players which we have to look at. Regulators I talked about, they have a say in this. We are a regulated industry. Whether I go fishing or not, till I'm in banking, I have to understand I'm in a regulated industry and I have to adhere to the regulations of the industry. Customers are part of this ecosystem. If you were to ask me in technical terms, what's the most basic and critical thing in compliance, it's KYC, know your customer. You can get many other things wrong, but if you get that wrong, you will never get your compliance program right. So, as they say, it takes two to tango. We may want to get to know our customer, But perhaps our customer wants to hide behind a curtain. It's not going to work. We can come up with the most elaborate processes for capturing information, but if the customer doesn't keep us current on their affairs of state, that information is meaningless. If the customer does not understand the need for it, this process will not work because they will not share with you the information you need from the customer. So a customer is a very important stakeholder and has to understand they have to play in this game. If they don't play ball, i.e., they don't share their financial records, they don't keep accurate financial records, they don't understand the issue of beneficial ownership, and they bring to you party A to be the front versus themselves, it doesn't work. So they are an important player in the ecosystem. And lastly, partners. Today, more and more of our firms work with other parties to provide us key capabilities to do our work. And they have to adhere to the same regulations, standard of regulation that we in financial services do. A very simple example. Technology firms. Technology firms have to understand when they provide testing of systems for us, when they design systems, if the mapping is not done correctly, if the data fields are not designed correctly and are not audible, and there's no way to check the integrity of the data fields, financial crime systems cannot work. Financial crime requires huge amount of data analytics. Live example of this, Commonwealth Bank of Australia, CBA. I don't know how many of you heard of it. Cost them $700 million in Australia. What happened? A stupid mistake in the computer. The dumb little computer machine we have sitting in the back of the room which we don't care about. One mapping in one software was not done correctly, because of which transactions of certain type which were being loaded into an ATM machine by customers were not being fed into the monitoring systems of the bank. So for 7 years, this went undetected. And billions moved. And the regulator, when they found out about it, were not very happy with the Common Bank of Australia. And they cost it $700 million because of one technology problem. Was it the fault of the technology firm? No. It was the fault of the ecosystem, because the technology firm did not understand the rigor of testing they need to do when they're doing change. If they keep sending new softwares every day and you have to install them, people get tired of the testing they have to do. And the bank did not understand the importance of how to make sure linkages are looked at in change of systems. So that's what I mean by the partners. Everybody has to play their role in it. So, having talked about all this, let's now talk about what does the good look like. What is it which can make an effective compliance program? And unfortunately for you, I have nothing on technology on this page. Unfortunately for you, I have nothing about complicated laws. My friend Mahmood is much better at explaining those than me. It's about the big C, culture. But what is culture? If you ask anthropologists, you'll get a different answer than me. I'm going to talk about the culture in a company, not in a society. Culture means organizational values. You walk into most companies, walk into Procter & Gamble, JP Morgan, every company's got something on the wall. Think back, how many of those value statements have something about adherence to regulations and compliance? None. We take it for granted. We say that's part of the value system to be a legal person. But in today's world, you have to be explicit about it. You got to talk about it. You got to put it there. Organizational values have to reflect that this is part of the way we do business. Tone from the top. We all have attended business reviews, those of us who are in business. In business reviews, what's the first question the CEO asks you? Did you make your numbers or not? How much more are you going to make me? CEOs have to start asking that question. They should ask that question because that's what pays the salaries, that's what pays the shareholders, that's what pays the regulators. So we got to make money so we can pay everybody. But the second question has to be, did you make money the right way? Did you make money adhering to all rules and regulations? Did you make money in conducting business fairly with your customers? Did you treat your customers fairly? That's the tone from the top. You can't just think about these things. You have to talk about them. You have to talk about them the way you talk about anything important in business. Compliance, regulations are important, and the people at the top of the firm have to not just think it, not just write it in a memo, but live it. When they go to a meeting, when they meet with somebody, be it in-house or outside, they have to discuss this as an issue also to show that this is important to them. Consistency of messaging. You can hire a communication firm to decode that for you. Or, in my opinion, that has to do with something very simple. When you hold a town hall, I don't know if you hold town halls or not, when you go to a forum like this, do you discuss the same thing again and again? If in one meeting and in one forum you sit and say one thing on regulations, and in another forum you say something different, the consistency gets lost. Your employees, your customers, your board has to see you being consistent in believing it, walking it in all forums. Very important, being comfortable speaking up. Again, very simple example. How many of us are willing to ask the hard questions? How many of you have teenage kids at home? I do. How many of us ask them, what was your score in your exam? We do. If they come home at 4 in the morning, we tend to ask them, there was a midnight curfew, where were you till 4 in the morning? Those are the hard questions, right? It's not an easy conversation to have with a grown-up child. In the companies, we have to do the same thing. We have to put forward the difficult question. Our colleague just talked about bribery and the new standards for bribery in the ISO. That's a very difficult discussion to have with your customers, with your staff. But you got to have it. You got to put it on the table and say, this is what we believe in, this is what we don't believe in. Are you practicing this? Are you asking these questions? Do you know your customer? If your customer is coming in and saying, I have a business worth ₹1 billion a month, and in that customer's account, 5 billion is coming, are you asking them what's happening? Oh my God, that's great. I made more money this month because I got 5 billion of business from this customer versus $1 billion. You got to ask that question and say, yeah, it's good I made money. But you also have to ask, wait a minute, this customer told me they only do ₹1 billion of business. Where did the other 4 come from? That's speaking up. Accountability, everybody talks about. Accountability, NAB is here somewhere in the room. They want to talk about. Everybody's about accountability. But accountability, to my mind, is a very simple concept. When you sit across the table, you don't ask, what did you do? You ask, what did you do and what did I do? You got to stop going this way. You have to take charge and say, we as a company are accountable for our behavior. Each person is accountable for his behavior. Our customers are important part of the accountability. So accountability is about not passing the buck, not telling others what to do, but being part of doing what you ask others to do. And this is very interesting, the hire to retire life cycle. I don't know how many of you work in HR, but that's how you define the employee life cycle these days. It means when you hire a person, at that point, as part of the interview process, as part of the testing you do you really check about their integrity? Do you ask about their integrity? We all ask about scores in GMATs and what grade did you get when you passed, what was your GPA in your class. How many of us ask, did you ever take $10 from your mother's wallet without asking her? Do we do background checks? Yes, it's intrusive, but if you want to be part of my family, I want to know something about you. That's asking the hard question. So, at the time of onboarding people, make it part of the process. That's what I mean by culture. When they come into business, many of the businesses have training programs. In our company, we have a training program. It's about 6 months long. In the training program, we teach them what? Products. This is what a bank's product looks like. We tell them about our policies. We tell them about accounting. In banks, accounting is kind of important. I think my colleagues from KPMG would agree with that. But how many of you stand up and tell them, if you want to work here, you have to understand we don't do wrong things. We don't give bribes. We ensure we adhere to regulations. We ensure we understand our customers. So, hiring process, induction process. And then I'll talk about one thing which I strongly believe in. There can be a lot of debate on this. When people leave a company, make people go with respect. Treat people with respect on the way out. Why? Then you have a colleague for life. You have people who come back and tell you what's happening wrong and right in the world and in your company. They're your eyes and ears. Somebody who spent 10, 20, 30 years in a company has loyalty to that company. I left my previous employer, one of my previous employers about 5 years ago. I still love them. I used to work for Citi for 35 years. And I have the utmost respect for Citi. But in part that comes in the way they retired me. So on the way out, treat people. That's what we mean about culture, values being consistent across business, across how we work and how we treat people and what messages we send to them. But there has to be a little bit of a stick also. And the last one is the stick. In addition to the carrot, you got to get people to stop having goals and objectives which are just driven by business. Goals and objectives have to be what's called a balanced scorecard. Right there, it has to say, you will ensure controls in your business will work. Right there, you have to say, if this doesn't work, you're going to be penalized. I used to work in Africa for my company. Some event happened in Latin America, which affected the whole company. It was a big event. This was in the mid-80s. Guess what? I didn't get my bonus in Africa. I felt the pain because of what happened in Latin America. That's the balanced scorecard. You got to share in the gains and you have to share in the pain. That's when you realize, I am responsible for what happens in this company. So, FATF. FATF, to my mind, to get right in any country, in any part of the world, you have to have linkages between your institutional mechanisms to get the design of the policy right, the implementation also right. I gave the example of one country. You can pick up any other country. But unless you identify the key players on the government side and make sure that they're linked together, they exchange information, they have policies which don't contradict each other, you cannot get at a country level implementation right. Today, it's not about the rules. Everybody knows the rules. It's not about tick the box. It's about how well the rules are being implemented. You have to show you understand what risks are in your system and are those risks being addressed by product, by geography, by business segment, by the neighborhood you are in. Some parts of the world, bribery is an issue. Some parts of the world, drug money is an issue. Some parts of the world, terrorism financing is an issue. So you have to make sure in implementation, you're taking a risk-based approach, addressing those particular types of corridors which are creating risk in your geography. Then you make it specific to you. You can't take something from another country and cut and paste and put a PowerPoint presentation about it. That is not implementation. And to get implementation right, I strongly believe you have to have public sector, private sector dialogue. Why? Because as I was pointing out, there are many things different parts of the people in the ecosystem do. They all have to be able to deliver what you ask them to. It's no use making a policy which sounds fantastic, reads very well, but is not executable. There are practical flaws in it. When you roll it out, you think you've done a great job as a country, but if the different people we talked about in the ecosystem side are not able to deliver on it, you will not get implementation. So through dialogue, upfront, get an understanding what's doable, not doable, what are the time frames to do it. It's one thing to issue a memo, do it by tomorrow. But if the work requires 36 hours, guess what? It's not going to get done by tomorrow. You think it got done by tomorrow because you issued the memo or the circular. So work between public sector and private sector to ensure what's done is realistic, deliverable. And lastly, it's not just what's happened in the past. If you just keep addressing the issues of the past, that's remediation. You have to be forward-looking and say, what are the new risks coming up? What are the issues that these policies have to address going forward also? That's when it becomes implementable. And then, most important, if nothing else, please remember, if at the end of the whole process of a design, of a rollout, of a program for FATF adherence, it does not show that the risk is reducing, illicit activity is coming down, the program has not been effective. It can be the best PowerPoint presentation, but if it did not result in reduction in risk, it's not effective. So I think those are a few things I have to share. Those are my personal views. There can be a lot of debate on this. So I talked about everybody else. What about the banks? What should the banks be doing to make sure they get compliance right? On the right side are the key things in governance, process, people, technology, data, huge area, and then reporting. In that, the first thing we have to understand is because we want to do work in our own markets and other markets, the process we design, the approach we design has to meet local standards and international standards. Otherwise, we will not be compliant in some jurisdictions. So decide which standard it is, whether it's FATF, Wolfsburg, local regulations, but you have to benchmark to some standard, and you have to know which standard you're benchmarking to. You have to understand how the rest of the world has introduced the concept of completeness in checkpoints. There's very standard things. These are all in the public space, whether it's a consent order issued in the US or the PRA letter or the Singapore Monetary Authority letter. They have a certain things that they require of you. Understand them and live to their standard if you operate in their jurisdiction. People. You can read all the files in the bank, you can read all the policies, but unless you sit across from people and see what their understanding is, how they implement them, it does not work. If you don't have the right talent, Mahmood talked a little bit about the salaries being paid to compliance these days. Yeah, people get paid a lot. Why? They're in demand. Why are they in demand? Because there are not enough good compliance people. You got to have the right talent in compliance and many other parts of the organization which support that. So there's a new thing called compliance technology people. People who specialize in technology for compliance. So you have to look at the whole organization and say, where do I embed the right talent to support this? What is the quality of my people today? In that, roles and responsibilities of the people. Front, business, the support functions, and the independent functions. First, second, third line of defense. Clear roles and responsibilities have to be there for it to work effectively. There are standards being now set of what you should be answerable to others who you deal with on compliance. Understand those standards. They're called the AML questionnaires. And be able to respond to that. Documentation is very important because you have to show the paper trail to support what you have done and not done. So good documents, good production of records for your own management, for your internal audit functions, and the regulators. Data, I said, is huge. Data is the food which gives the energy to the compliance function now. Without right MIS, we will drown in the amount of alerts we generate. We'll drown in the amount of hits we get. Just to give you an idea, 95% of alerts tend to be what's called false positives. They have no meaning. 95%. It's just the 5%. It's like looking for a needle in a haystack. There's something called analyst fatigue. The people who look at these actually get tired. They get used to seeing the same nonsense again and again, and they say, oh, this is okay. Last time it was garbage, this time it's garbage. Out of 95%, suspicious activity, what they call SARS reporting, is 2% in most places. Some places in the good jurisdiction is 3%. So you read today in an environment where 97% of the work you're doing has no value. So you need to use data analytics, you need to use technologies to try to improve these ratios, to improve the productivity, so you can focus on the real risks. Otherwise you'll get lost. And then the last one is walkthroughs with your staff, with customers. You have to meet, you have to sit there and look them in the eye and validate what's in the file. If there's a profile of a customer, I go back to my example, ₹1 billion a month, and they're doing ₹5 billion of business, you got to sit down and have that conversation with them. So it's very important from that you generate the right dashboards to understand what data is showing you, not what your opinion is. And that's where the MIS and recording comes in. Without the right information, you will have opinions. Opinions can belong to one person, and one person can say everything is okay. The other person can say everything is not okay. So in banks, we have to adopt this type of an approach and a process to improve the effectiveness of our compliance programs. It's a lot of work, it's expensive, it's time consuming, it's a multi-year journey. Anybody tells you, I can do this in 30 days, is going to do a very poor job of it. Any bank, and I've seen it in 3-4 banks now, which is good at completing this program, requires 3 to 5 years from the design to the implementation to sustainability, because you don't want to just do it one time and then forget about it. You have to show how on an ongoing basis this works. And there's some data now which says the amount paid in the fine is about the same amount it is required to invest to fix the programs. So if you get fined $100 million, it needs $100 million of investment to address these issues. So it's very expensive. Yes, these are big numbers, but remember the number which is bigger, your brand, your reputation, and the cost which comes when that brand is affected. Do brands get affected? Yes. How many of you sitting here would have thought GE would get kicked out of the index? Very few of us. How many of you have thought there was a bank called Lehman Brothers, it won't exist? It doesn't. How many of you heard of a bank called Continental Bank? It was a big bank in the 70s. Does it exist today? No. Companies do disappear. Individuals disappear. People who are superstars today. Where are the CEOs of the banks of the early 2000s? Not one of them is around. And we all used to think of them as icon figures. Sandy Weil was considered the smartest entrepreneur in the world. Where is he today? Nobody even knows. He's sitting in California enjoying the beach. So, reputation, brands are more important than individuals, and we have to make sure we put these programs in place if we want to be a responsible member of the ecosystem. Thank you.